In the year 2005, an animated cartoon came out on Nickelodeon that had a unique magic system, a world that was new yet familiar, filled with characters and creatures that captured the hearts and minds of children across the world. In that same year, a book came out that had magical creatures, a unique magic system, a world that was new yet familiar, filled with characters that captured the hearts and minds of children across the world. And within just a few short years, both of these series got the coveted live-action movie. Each one promising a huge budget, amazing acting, and the ability to bring each beloved series from the page and the small screen to the real world on the big screen. If you haven't guessed yet, the two series I'm talking about are Avatar: The Last Airbender and Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Why would I talk about this now? It's been well over 10 years, and everybody has moved on from these beloved series and the failed movies they both got. Well, not everyone moved on. For years, the fans of Percy Jackson were begging for there to be a new chance to finally get the live-action series they were promised all those years ago. However, one big complaint is that the runtime of a movie is too short to capture all the necessary elements of the books. So, they asked for instead a TV show. And after 12 long, grueling years, Disney finally announced that they would be making a new TV show for Percy Jackson and the Olympians on their coveted streaming service, Disney+. And around the same time, even though all fans of Avatar did not require a new adaptation, Netflix said, "We're doing it anyways, and we're making a new live-action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender." And the entire fan base of Avatar said,
I don't know.
However, Netflix went forward with the show anyway. We waited for years. News announcements, casting announcements, location announcements, all the announcements came month after month after month. And on December 10th, 2023, the Percy Jackson live-action TV show on Disney Plus aired its first episode. And then, on February 23rd, 2024, the Avatar live-action TV show Season 1 was dropped on Netflix. Since both these shows are based on an original series that were dropped in the early 2000s with massive fan bases that both have a failed live-action movie, getting a live-action TV show within 3 months of each other, and both of these shows have exactly 8 episodes, and I loved both of the original works, I thought I would compare the two shows and see how they stack up. Which one is better? Which one is worse? Are they both terrible? Are they both amazing? Is it somewhere in between? Now, I already did an episode by episode raw reaction on my channel. You can go watch those videos. And my friend, the Mythology guy, aka Andrew, he did his reaction for all the episodes of Percy Jackson, and I agreed with him for the most part. We watched those together. So if you want to see our opinions on those, go watch his videos, go watch my videos. This is going to be kind of more of a which show was better. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is just all my opinion. There's no real objective argument. I don't believe you can be objective about forms of storytelling, movies, TV shows, books, whatever, because it all comes down to how you felt when you were watching it. There are arguments you can make as to why one works better or one works worse, but at the end of the day, there's no like measurement like, oh, it has to be this many episodes and each episode has to be this long for it to be good. No, there are plenty of shows that are short. There are plenty of shows that are long. There are plenty of movies that are short, long movies, everywhere in between. And there are good and bad of all versions. Like there's a 4-hour movie of Justice League that is really good. And then there's a 2-hour version that is not good. That alone can tell you that length and scenes and whatever isn't really what makes something good or bad. Now, your first question might be, how am I going to compare them then if it's all subjective and there's no objective measurement? Well, you see, I'm just really going to talk about aspects of the show that stood out to me and state my personal opinions on how I thought the adaptation worked and if I enjoyed it or not. So as Charles Martinet says, let's go. So first, let's get the objective measurements out of the way. These are the most objective measurements I can, and that's the runtime. These shows have a very distinct difference when it comes to their runtime. They both have 8 episodes, and reportedly, each episode for both shows costs around $15 million. However, the runtime of each episode is pretty different. See, when Avatar was announced, one of the big worries was that it would only be 8 episodes and each episode would only be 30 minutes, which is an understandable concern. The original show had 20 episodes, each clocking in around about 20 minutes, or around 6 hours and 40 minutes of screen time total in the first season. We later had rumors that each episode would be about an hour long. Doing some quick calculations, 8 1-hour long episodes is, okay, carry the one, 8 hours. Yes, 8 hours. Which, if my calculations are correct, would be more than the total runtime of the original cartoon. With Percy Jackson, however, it's a little bit different. Since it's adapting a book, the main concern isn't being short or longer, but more so keeping major plot points and character moments in the series and not cutting them out entirely. Especially since one of the major complaints from the movie adaptation is how often they cut out major scenes from the books that readers loved. Now, I wanted to be as fair as possible to each show, since this is the only really objective measurement I can use to gauge the difference between the two. I figured the best way to decide how long an episode is was to start the timer when a new scene starts playing and to stop the timer when the screen goes to black or the credits start rolling. This means I'm not counting the time dedicated to intros, after credits, any previously on moments that are part of the TV show's original runtime on the player. The reason I did this was because you're not going to usually stay to watch the credits all the way through. That's not part of the episode. You're also not going to watch the intro 50 billion times. You're not going to watch the previously on. Most people are going to skip that, so it's not really part of the runtime, and it's also wasting your time. It's the equivalent of adding the runtime to ads to a full TV show's runtime instead of only looking at how much of the new show we're actually getting, because the rest of it is essentially just filler. One Piece fans, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So in my analysis, the show officially starts when there is new footage running and officially ends once the credits start rolling or it goes to black. Using this method, I found out that the shortest episode of Percy Jackson was around 28 minutes, while the shortest episode of Avatar was 40 minutes. Then, I noticed the longest episode of Percy Jackson was 39 minutes, and the longest episode of Avatar was 57 minutes. Looking at those raw numbers side by side, you can already see a pretty major difference between the two shows. The Percy Jackson episodes are shorter than the Avatar episodes. Now, at first, I thought maybe it balances out with the rest of the episodes, so I double-checked every single episode's runtime, and I added them together, calculating the amount of time spent sitting on my couch from episode 1 to episode 8 for each show. Running these numbers through a supercomputer, the final calculation for the Percy Jackson show's runtime ends at 4 hours, 33 minutes, and 21 seconds, while Avatar had a full runtime of 6 hours, 25 minutes, and 2 seconds. Doing some more quick maths, I learned that Percy Jackson and Avatar: The Last Airbender have a difference of 1 hour, 51 minutes, and 41 seconds to the total runtime of both shows from episode 1 to episode 8. To put that into perspective, the first Percy Jackson movie clocks in at 1 hour and 59 minutes, and the second Percy Jackson movie clocks in at 1 hour and 47 minutes. Meaning, the Percy Jackson live-action TV show on Disney Plus had an entire movie worth of runtime, less than Netflix's Avatar. Because the cost of both shows is the same, while the running time was vastly different, I have to give this first point to Avatar. Now, you might be wondering, why does the runtime matter? You just said earlier that a longer show or a longer movie doesn't instantly make it better, and a shorter show and a shorter movie doesn't instantly make it worse. And that is true. However, one of the big problems that people had with the Percy Jackson movies is it didn't give enough time to characters and scenes. And the more time that is given to a show, the more time we, the audience, have to connect with certain characters and moments. The less screen time a show has, the more scenes you have to cut out or condense, giving you less time to connect with the characters in the shows like you did in a book or other series. This brings up an important question that every writer eventually has to tackle. With less screen time, how do you get important information across the audience in the shortest amount of time? The answer is simple: exposition. I'm sorry if that word gave you a bad taste in your mouth or it even caused you to get sick, but hold on, bear with me. I should let you know there are two types of exposition. There's good exposition and there's bad exposition. Bad exposition is easy to notice. You just have one character stand there and give a lecture on some event or feeling they have. While on the other hand, good exposition is a much harder thing to do and even harder to notice. It needs to feel natural and come across not as a lecture, but a conversation or a story being told, not just to the audience, but to the characters within the world, both at the same time. One of the hardest things to explain with good exposition is the world that the characters exist in. In both the original book and the original cartoon, the worlds created are universally loved. So they had a monumental task of bringing these fantasy worlds to life while explaining it to audiences both old and new. And yes, I count Percy Jackson as having unique world building, because while it does take place in our real world, the way that it's molded with Greek mythology is so unique and fun that I dare you to explain how it can't be considered a form of world building. Unfortunately, both of these shows use bad exposition to explain the world. We'll start with Avatar, as the two mediums used for the original cartoon and the live action were both TV shows, making it a lot easier to compare one-to-one. In the original cartoon, we get the iconic intro about the world and the current conflict right from the start. Now, you might think this is a bad version of exposition based on the example I gave you earlier. However, in my opinion, this is fantastic exposition, and it works because it's being told from a character's perspective who is currently living in the world, and it's colored with her own thoughts and feelings on the matters, thus making the world feel alive and real, and not, again, like a lecture or something you read out of a textbook. Unfortunately, in the live action, we don't start with that explanation from Katara. We start with the actual event that jumpstarts the story, the attack on the Southern Air Temple. Now, this by itself is not a problem because it does the same thing the original series did, where it sets up the world and gives us our main conflict all in one scene. However, the first problem comes in the middle of this scene, where we have Avatar Kyoshi read the original intro from the cartoon. Not only is this not necessary because we are literally in the middle of showing us how the war started, but it's not even from Katara's perspective. It's told to us by an all-knowing narrator who's standing on the outside looking in, instead of from a character on the inside of the world looking out. The second problem with how they do their exposition comes about 25 minutes after they show the attack on the Southern Air Temple. We have Aang, Katara, and Sokka in one of the huts surrounded by all of the people in the village, and suddenly Gran just starts reciting the iconic speech about the four nations.
Water, earth, fire, air.
This is a major problem, not just because it's the same speech twice, but also the audience literally saw the war start. We saw what the Fire Nation did to the air nomads. This isn't new information for us, even if it is your first time ever watching Avatar, or you never heard of Avatar before this. Unlike in the original, where we're literally starting from no information, this time we already have this basis of information, and it's just being repeated to us. Yeah, I know about the four nations already, and I already saw the war happen. Who is this for?
Everyone in the village knows this story, but you don't, do you, young man?
So this is for Aang then? If you were going to do this, why even have the scene with Kyoshi where she does the iconic speech? Why have the Fire Nation attack the Air Temple? Just start us in the South Pole instead and have Gran give us the speech. At least then it might have felt like we were learning something with the characters. Instead, we're learning something for the third time just so we can see Aang learn it? And it's not even that emotional a moment for Aang, it's just like a history lecture. Almost say it with me, like you're reading out of a textbook, which if you remember, I said was a form of bad exposition. Now, don't think I've forgotten about you, Percy Jackson. You also suffer from too much exposition. For instance, when we get to Camp Half-Blood in the books, we have moments of Percy walking through the camp, meeting different characters, learning about the hidden world of monsters and myth as he talks with Annabeth and Chiron. For example, when he meets the god Dionysus, he doesn't know he's a god at first. In fact, Percy doesn't even believe there are gods at this point in the book. This leads to a conversation between Percy, Mr. D, and Chiron about how Percy would feel if people didn't believe in him. And during that conversation, Percy takes certain context clues given to him and figures out the person he's talking to right now is the god of wine, Dionysus. However, in the show, when he walks up to Mr. D, they have like a couple lines of dialogue, and then Grover just runs up and says,
Really don't want to start with this guy. He's starting with me. Percy, the D is for Dionysus. That's Dionysus.
Now, that doesn't feel earned like in the books. It feels given to Percy, almost like a lecture. It's also not the only time in this episode alone. At the end, when he actually learns who his father is, and he's moved from the Hermes cabin to the Poseidon cabin, in the books, we learn that Percy had this feeling of being included for the first time when he was in the Hermes cabin, and then when he was moved to cabin 3, and he sees he's the only one there, he now feels lonely again. But we don't get a moment showing Percy feeling lonely, or even a moment to admire his new cabin. Instead, we get 20 seconds to see the inside of cabin 3, and now he's being told he has to go on a quest to save the world. I am not kidding. It is 35 seconds from when we learn that he is the son of Poseidon to the scene when Mr. D and Chiron are sending him on a quest to save the world from a war between Zeus and his father. We don't even get a full minute to let that sink in for Percy, or even the audience for that matter. The quest itself doesn't even have any setup. The book decided to give you hints through Rick Riordan's wonderful writing in the first few chapters that something is going on, and Percy can tell things aren't quite right. For instance, Percy talks about freak weather that he's noticed, having a dream of an eagle and a horse fighting, the other kids at camp talking about weird stuff going on, Annabeth talking about how badly she's wanted to go on a quest for years and years, just waiting for the right camper to show up. However, in the show, we get to camp, Percy learns who Mr. D is, he walks around for a bit, does some capture the flag, now it's time for a quest, and all that happens in the span of maybe 30 minutes? Talk about a rush. I took longer to write this page of the script than the show took to let Percy learn about his origins and then get sent on a life or death quest. The point is, both shows have a problem with exposition. While Avatar does have this problem, it doesn't feel like every conversation is exposition. Whereas in Percy Jackson, it feels like every major plot point needs exposition. Otherwise, you might be too stupid to figure it out on your own. Since Percy Jackson overloads you with exposition, and Avatar was able to have more entertaining conversations without the overuse of exposition, I have to give another point to Avatar. On top of that, there's never a full moment where they just get to sit still, hang out, and talk about who they are or what their goals are after they finish this quest. Which leads perfectly into my next point, the characters. So I'm not really sure how to explain this next part, but I'm going to do the best job I can. The characters in these shows don't feel like the characters from their original series. Hear me out. Like, I'll start with Aang. In the original cartoon, he was very happy-go-lucky, with high energy, and very adventurous, always wanting to go on these little side quests for fun. In the Netflix version, he feels very grounded, kind of weighed down by his feeling of guilt. Like, I never got the feeling that they were on this grand adventure, ending up in fun, unique locations where Aang wanted to do something fun, which led to a fun adventure for the gang. Instead, it felt more like they were following a map, and that map required them to stop at each of these locations. Maybe that's because they were following a literal map with Zuko's notebook. I almost never got his childlike wonder from Aang, except for maybe in the very beginning of the show, and that kind of bothered me. It was like he was Diet Aang. On top of that loss of childlike wonder at times, there's also the fact that he's very young and attracted to Katara. He has this crush on her, clearly, and they never really expressed that in the show. However, I might just give them a pass because the actor Gordon Cormier is 14, and Kiwantio Tarbell, I'm sorry if I butchered that, is 17. So it might have felt a little weird for the people on set to have them building up a relationship, not only between literal children, but also when you think about it, one of them is almost a full-grown adult, and the other has only just started puberty. So again, well, as a viewer for the show, I'm not a fan of them taking that aspect out. As a human being in real life, I can kind of understand it when you look at the age gap. Moving on, let's talk about Sokka and how his sexism was completely removed from his character arc, and that is a huge disservice to his character. Now, I feel like this was done because some person, maybe a writer, a director, or an executive, thought that it was a good idea to take that out because having the main character be sexist was a promotion of sexism, and it told people that sexism is a good thing in this person's eye. However, anyone with half a brain can realize that the point wasn't to promote sexism, but to point out that it is a bad idea to have a sexist view on women as a man, and also to have a sexist view on men as a woman. So yes, it is a character flaw, but that was the point. The point isn't that he's already a perfect character, but that he is a flawed character, and he has to see his flaws and break through them to become the person he believes he is. And that starts with him looking down on women, not as people, but as lesser beings, and then realizing very quickly because of Suki that they are not worse than him. They can be equal or even better than him. And he needs to work on himself to be able to prove that he is better. And because of that, it changes their whole dynamic when they first meet. Instead of him kind of like pursuing her and her saying like, no, you're kind of a jerk, and then realizing he is a jerk and getting better, and that builds up their romance. Instead, she's pursuing him, and it makes her kind of look like a simp because she's like, oh, I've never seen a man from outside my village. It's like, yeah, he looks like another guy. I know that you're from different tribes, but still, it was a little odd. However, even with taking that aspect out, I still think he's a pretty good character in the show. His sister, Katara, on the other hand, made a lot of people mad, me included. I will say this, while Kiyoan, again, if I am butchering your name, I apologize, is doing a great job with what she's given. What she's given is not very good because whoever wrote this character did not write the character of Katara. Katara in the original cartoon is brash, headstrong, caring, hopeful, resourceful, and most of all, she is driven. However, Katara in live action is kind and caring and other stuff? Question mark? Yes, she has her fight with Paku at the end when they get to the North Pole, but in the original cartoon, it felt like she was fighting him because he was a huge obstacle in her way. And the only way to get past this obstacle was to show her skill set and her abilities, and once she broke that barrier, she could become the best waterbender she was meant to be. In the show, in the live action version that is, from Netflix, that's not the feeling I got. The feeling I got was, everybody loves this scene, so if we take it out, they'll try to kill us. And so we have to put the scene in. But they didn't do any of the legwork to get to the scene. So while visually it is a cool scene, and emotionally, if you've seen the show, you're like, oh my God, I love this scene. But when you think about it as a new viewer, did the show really get the right to have this scene? Did they build to the scene in the correct way? No, it just feels like it's there because it's supposed to be, not because it's meant to be, if you know what I mean. Again, just to finish this point, while this fight is awesome and cool and I love it, it does not feel like it's earned like in the original cartoon. Very similar issues persist in the Percy Jackson live action. Percy is very caring and always wants to do the right thing to help his friends and his family. However, while he is kind and caring, he's also easy to anger and doesn't always think before he acts. In fact, he will always do what he thinks is right, even at risk of hurting himself. That's the original version of Percy in the books. He does what he thinks is right, even if it's detrimental to his own well-being. However, when Chiron and Mr. D sent him on the quest to save the world in the Disney Plus adaptation, his response is,
Great. Good luck finding those guys, because it ain't gonna be me.
I don't want to because my dad never did anything for me, so why should I do something for him? This would make sense if Percy was supposed to be this character who holds grudges and hates his dad for not being there for him. However, in the books, I never got that feeling from Percy. You know that feeling of being raised by a single parent and hating the other parent who was never there for you? That's not the feeling I got from Percy. In the books, whenever he'd describe his dad, especially in the first book, he would always say he just remembered that he had this warm glow. And it felt neutral at worst. Not angry, just kind of like, I kind of remember my dad, like this warm glow. Doesn't sound very hostile. Then we move on to the next main character, Annabeth. Easily the character with the most controversy attached to them going into this remake, therefore putting the largest target on that character and the most scrutiny from the fans. Overall, just like with Percy, the show doesn't really get the character of Annabeth correct. It's able to portray her strategic mind, which gives her the ability to understand situations and people in ways others can't, giving her a tactical advantage, which I will say is a lot better than how Avatar live action portrays its female lead. However, while the show does a great job showing her strong suits, much like Sokka from Avatar, it fails to portray the rest of her character. For instance, when Percy first meets Annabeth, she seems hopeful and energetic that she might finally get the chance to go on a quest that she's been asking for Chiron for years and years and years. Only then to go from excitement to disappointment and frustration when she learns that Percy is the one who will get her on that quest. And not only is he the person who will get her on the quest, but he is also a son of Poseidon, a bitter rival to her mother Athena, who she desperately looks up to. On top of her dynamic with Percy, they ruin her dynamic with Luke. Not once does the show make it clear that she has any sort of crush or feelings, or even do they kind of seem like friends. They seem more like co-workers, colleagues, than longtime friends with a one-sided attraction. They even take out one of her fatal flaws, her fear of spiders. And one of her biggest goals in life is even missing from the show. The desire to become an architect, to build a monument grand enough to make her mother proud. The show never brings up either of these two aspects. And these are two major things that are not only important elements to make Annabeth a great character, but it's also important for her growth throughout the series. For instance, why do they go to the Missouri Gateway Arch? In the books, it's because she's so fascinated by the architecture, she makes the mistake of spending some of their precious time instead of being safe and staying on the move to avoid monsters. And in the show, they completely change the reason. Suddenly it's a temple to Athena, so monsters can't attack them while they're there. But then they can attack them because Athena is mad at them for a very random reason. I'm sorry, but if you loved this reason in the show, I have to disagree with you because I think one is way more compelling for a character than the other. Finally, I'm going to talk about Grover. Honestly, I have no idea how to start with this mess of a character outside of 2 words. He exists. Now, don't get me wrong, the acting portrayed by Aryan Samhadri, again, I'm sorry if I butchered that name, is really good. But the writing gives him nothing to work with. Like, for example, what does Grover do in this season? Why was he so vital to the team outside of being Percy's friend? The answer is nothing valuable, unfortunately. He has a good scene with Ares about gods and their children, then comes out of that scene saying, I know who actually stole the Master Bolt, which is ultimately incorrect. And so how does this help drive the plot forward? How does this grow his character? The only reason he is here is to be a neutral party for Percy and Annabeth when they fight with each other.
What's that about, do you think? And why do we have to hear it from Alecto?
Enough!
Which is another problem with this remake. Percy and Annabeth barely get along in the show.
Careful. I think you're about to call me a friend.
In the books, they all feel like close friends almost immediately. They care about each other, and they want each of them to succeed together, not just individually. In the show, it feels a little bit more like Harry and Draco from the first Harry Potter movie, when they have detention and they have to go with Hagrid into the Forbidden Woods. However, I will say about halfway through the show, there is that part where Percy has 2 admittedly good character scenes. The first one is where he decides to sacrifice himself against the Chimera. And the second time is when he sits on the chair and sacrifices himself and gets turned to gold, which would normally endear me to his character. But then I remembered this scene.
The fate of the world hangs in the balance. You will accept this quest.
I won't.
And this scene.
She fought valiantly, and she met a hero's fate.
She met a pinecone's fate.
Because of these, it kind of makes me not want to root for this main character. Instead, I'm just sitting there thinking, kind of a jerk, Percy. Speaking of jerks, you can't have protagonists without antagonists. So let me see how the show handles its villains. Since I'm already talking about Percy Jackson, let's continue there. The first antagonist of Percy in the group is Clarice. And here I will say her portrayal is not bad. Really, the only problem I have is the physicality of the character is taken out and she just kind of looks like a normal teenager, but maybe that's just because they wanted this actress really bad. And of course, she only has like 3 scenes in this first season, so I won't spend too much time on her. Maybe I'll have more to say in season 2 because she plays a much bigger role in the second book. However, the character the show definitely spends too much time on is Medusa. For some odd reason, the show decided that having this air of mystery with this strange old Greek woman and her odd statue emporium in the middle of nowhere was a bad idea. Instead, they'd say the best idea is just to have the characters immediately know who she is from the moment she appears, just like with Mr. D. Not only is this disappointing, it's kind of annoying because while yes, everyone and their grandma knows the story of Medusa. However, how many people would expect a random statuary store in the middle of the woods to be run by the Medusa? The answer is people who have read the Percy Jackson books. Well, this is a show based on that, so there's no way they could have read it, so that's already a point off. And on top of that, this show is supposed to be a recreation of the original Percy Jackson books. Meaning, just like how the original book decided to have it be this old woman shrouded in mystery, the show should have stuck to the same formula. Instead, the writers decided that this was the perfect time to have a conversation about her true origin story. This is probably because some people online now sympathize with Medusa from Greek myth, and either because one of those people who sympathize is in the writer room, or because they thought it would work better to help the audience like the show more, they decided that it would be time to ask the question of, is she really the villain? Are the gods the villain? What's the real answer here? And that way our heroes don't just kill her and move on, they have to think about it more. But ultimately, they end up just killing her and moving on, so the whole conversation is pointless and it just feels like a waste of time to me. It doesn't stop there either. When we meet Procrustes, Percy knows who he is before even we, the audience, see the character. In fact, before the episode even starts, he already knows. The characters literally have a conversation off screen about who he is and what he does and already create a plan. Like when I was watching it with Andrew, we both were like, did Percy just go off script here? It felt like they both had a script and Percy just decided to start ad-libbing in the middle of the scene, and Procrustes was like, dude, what are you doing? Get back on script the whole time. Like it just felt really off. On top of that, the gods are kind of ruined. Yeah, Ares is a jerk for a little bit, but he never feels like a living nuke of hate and anger. Hephaestus shows up for 2 seconds to literally Deus Ex Machina Percy out of a trap. We meet Hermes in the Lotus Eater casino so we can waste their time because reasons. And then they miss the due date, which why would you change that in the story? I hated that. And then Hades. When we meet Hades, king of the underworld, fear of all mortal men, he just feels like some tech bro who just runs some random company under some mines or something. And he was apparently expecting Percy to show up so they could hash out some sort of deal for his mom. I'm just gonna say this. If you didn't mind Percy coming into your domain, why did you send your henchman to go and kill him? Why did you send your 3-headed dog to stop him when he got to the entrance? What does this do for these characters? Does this add anything new to them? Does this make them more compelling? Does this actually expand in the world, showing different sides of the Olympian gods and their power struggles between each other and the other forces at play? No, it doesn't. It just makes every god feel like a living wet noodle made of tofu. No, I'm serious. The only time I ever felt any threat or tension from any creature or god was the monsters who couldn't speak. I will say, the all-powerful ruler of the universe, Zeus, was probably the best role from any god in the entire show. And I'm gonna chalk that up to the great Lance Reddick's performance. May he rule the heavens in peace. Now, you get to Avatar. Well, I think Avatar does its antagonist fairly well for the most part. It also has issues. We get to see Ozai and how he rules the Fire Nation, which we never got to see in the original cartoons, so that was kind of nice. However, some people say these extra parts are good, while others say they're not good. Personally, I'm a bit on the fence with this argument. On the one hand, the acting done by Daniel Day Kim and the brutality and cunning they show of his character is well done in my opinion. On the other hand, his consistent mind games he plays with Azula and his newfound empathy and pride for Zuko feels almost like a different character than Ozai. See, in the original cartoon, it was very clear that Ozai had a favorite golden child in Azula, while Zuko was more of an afterthought. However, in the live action, it feels more like Zuko and Azula are both equals in Ozai's eyes, and maybe Zuko might even be the favorite above Azula, which if you watch the original cartoon makes this version of Ozai feel almost like Diet Ozai. They also changed the character of Zhao. In the original, he was clearly this very driven character who was already noticed by the higher-ups and was slowly being promoted throughout the show. However, now Ozai literally says he's some nobody captain from the South Pole, simply used by Azula for some weird mind games to mess with Zuko. And honestly, this one doesn't bother me at all, because in the original cartoon, they were very flip-floppy on his character. At one point, he's very cunning and intelligent. At other points, he's just this raging, flaming beast man. At least this version is consistent all the way from the beginning to the end as this driven, snaky-like individual who wants recognition and maybe even the throne. I also have to say the performance from Ken Leung was so much fun. I loved every scene he was in, so I might be a bit biased in this regard. The real problems come from how Zuko and Azula are portrayed by the script. Zuko, for the most part, still feels like Zuko, with his arrogant belief that he will one day catch the Avatar, and he's fueled by this drive to reclaim his honor and return home. However, in the original show, it felt like he was desperate to go home, and that was his real reason. Whereas in this version, it feels like he has this weird honor, like he believes he actually needs to take the throne, not just go home and see his friends and family, but rule his nation. On top of that, they also add this odd scene where Zuko and Aang have this heart-to-heart right after Zuko frees Aang from Zhao as the Blue Spirit. And personally, I don't think Zuko at this point in time would be emotionally stable enough to talk to Aang like a person. He should still be fueled by anger, hate, and desperation. So instead of talking to Aang, he should just be attacking him just out of nowhere, just to capture him, not even seeing him as a person, but as an object. I feel like it's because the writers wanted to make him more sympathetic early on, so we could see his character growth more easily in the beginning. But I feel like this isn't the time to do it, because you haven't done the legwork yet, it doesn't feel earned, and it feels more like you're doing this because you know people love Zuko's character arc so much. But again, like with Sokka, the reason they like it so much is because he starts from this terrible place, and he has to slowly build up to become sympathetic. It takes a long time, almost 2 full seasons in fact. So doing it now in season 1, I think was a bad idea. Then we come to Azula. I know this version made a lot of people mad, like really mad. I, however, felt more apathetic to this new version, like I didn't really care. And that's probably mostly because she was non-existent in season 1 of the cartoon, much like Fire Lord Ozai. However, now she takes up a lot more screen time in the show. And this new role she plays is the one manipulating Zhao and training while her friends and her dad just watch for some reason. These scenes kind of almost feel like filler. Don't misunderstand, I can believe Azula trains consistently every day to be the perfect Fire Lord she believes she's meant to be. It's not her training that's the problem. It's that Ozai is just watching her and looking down on her while playing mind games with her the whole time. I don't believe Ozai would do that. Like, if Ozai really felt like he needed to watch over every aspect of her training every single day because she wasn't good enough, would Ozai have ever said to Zuko,
"My father says she was born lucky. He says I was lucky to be born."
I don't think so. Also, for some reason, Ty Lee and May are just hanging out with her while she trains. Like, I know they're her best friends, but they also have their own lives. I mean, do you remember what Ty Lee was doing in the original cartoon when we met her? She was in the circus. Why does she need to be here? What does that change for the story? Nothing. All it adds is scenes where these 2 teenage girls talk shit about the Fire Lord to his own daughter in his own courtyard. Sounds like a good way to get your face burned off, like that insurrection guy. Now, those are all the major characters in the show that we see a lot of. And you might be thinking, okay, I have no more characters to talk about. However, there is one character that the community feels very divided on. One half says they had an interesting idea with this new adaptation and are mostly cool with it, while the other half hates what they did to this character and they feel betrayed. It is, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, Boomy! The crazy old man from 100 years ago who teaches Aang the power of patience and
rock candy.
I am a bit divided, personally. On the one hand, yes, this is not Boomy from the cartoon. Live-action Boomy is bitter and angry from living throughout the last 100 years of war, whereas cartoon Boomy is meant to be this crazy old man who seems completely insane, but it turns out is actually very intelligent, and his plans are so unique and outside the box that he's able to outmaneuver his enemies very easily. So if you really wanted the cartoony crazy old man, then you're gonna hate this new version. If you were expecting them to be changed because it's not a cartoon anymore and be more serious like the tone of this whole show is, then you're probably fine with him. To kind of wrap this point up, I think both shows do a disservice to their characters just in different ways. One tries to take the core elements and mold them for a new style of the show, while the other one, in my opinion, strips all of its characters of their original flaws and goals, which I was not a fan of. This means that the third point goes to Avatar, but just barely. There is one final point I want to compare between these shows before we wrap this video up. And seeing how the script is already over 20 pages long, I think I'll try to speed through this just like the story did, and that's coincidentally the story. Neither show really gets the story wrong per se. Every major event that happens in their respective source materials happens in the live action adaptations, except in Avatar. Aang never learns to waterbend. Don't know why they changed that. That was kind of a dumb decision. However, while Avatar is supposed to be different from the cartoon because it's a new medium and a new tone, the Percy Jackson show is supposed to be the definitive live-action recreation of the books the fans always wanted, and this is not that. This show, while going through all the major plot points, doesn't feel like it wants to be connected to the books. It feels like it wants to be better than the books, which is shown by the fact that characters already know every mystery that was slowly unraveled in the original series. Obstacles that were in the books and felt like major hurdles where they had to use their wits and skills to get through are now solved by godly intervention. The gods and monsters are more human, making them less threatening and less powerful and more simple and tame. Ultimately, while this is the story of Percy Jackson, this is not the world or the characters of Percy Jackson. And this show doesn't even feel like it was made for the fans. It feels like it was made by a company who knows there's a big fan base and they can tap into some free money and press, ultimately giving the fans a hollow recreation of a beloved product instead of giving them the thing that we all loved in the first place, which is something Disney would never do, right? Adding up all the points, Avatar wins. Tell them what they won, Jack. Well, they win the illustrious Not As Bad As You Could Have Been award. Now, we're at the end of the video, and you might be sitting there typing, "You're being too mean to Percy Jackson," or "You're being too nice to Avatar." And you might be right. I probably agree with you. These are just my opinions after all. They're not fact, it's just how I feel. And I'm probably letting my feelings get the better of me because between the two shows, I enjoyed Avatar a lot more. However, there are a few more reasons that I was more hard on Percy Jackson than Avatar. The first one is that I already have a version of the TV show that I like, and that's the cartoon. And no live action adaptation can take that away from me. Even if they make a billion of them, there will always be the original cartoon. And if I want to watch the best version, I can watch the cartoon. While for Percy Jackson, there is no live action adaptation, or an animated version for that matter, that feels like it does service the books and is the recreation I want. On top of that, Disney's the one who made the live action Percy Jackson show, which may sound like I'm just hating on Disney, especially since what I said earlier, but I promise you, I don't hate Disney. There are still things I enjoy from them from time to time. The reason I bring this up is because this show was a personal litmus test for me to see how they would adapt the book series I read as a kid into a show. And in my eyes, they failed. The reason I was testing them is because my favorite book series also had a terrible live action movie in the early 2000s, and it also recently was greenlit for a TV show on Disney+. If you don't know what book it is, it's Aragon. And if they're going to be doing Percy Jackson this way, I'm very worried how they'll be doing Aragon when they make that show. Will the characters feel off like in the Percy Jackson show? Will they PG-ify all the violent action just so it looks more appealing to investors and their marketing team? Will they try to cram scenes that I love that were longer than a minute into a few seconds or just cut them out entirely? These are all questions I have going into this live action adaptation, and I'm afraid they're going to be answered in ways like they were in the Percy Jackson show, and I didn't like that. However, I want to end this video with some hope. I want these shows to be better, and I believe that they can. For that to happen though, the writers and the studios running these shows need to listen to complaints from people like me and not just dismiss them as toxic internet hate. A good example is Ugly Sonic. We all came together and said, change it, because it was terrible. And they did. And we got a much better version of the movie because of that. And more people went to see it. And the reason we said that isn't just because we're toxic internet people. It's because we want the shows to be as good as they can be. No one turns on the TV or goes to the movie theater and wants to have a bad time. So please, Disney, Netflix, listen and adapt. If you do that, maybe my next video on this topic will be a lot more positive. Hey, thanks for watching the video all the way to the end. It truly means a lot. Please click that like button or dislike button and leave a comment so I know what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. By the way, I have a little game for you. Somewhere in the video, I left a random word on the screen. If you saw it, comment it down below and I'll have your name in the credits for the next video. While you're doing that, on the left is a video of mine YouTube thinks you'll like, and on the right is a video from my stream channel. Finally, remember the #1 rule here. Don't believe in yourself. Believe in me, who believes in you.